Hello, so this is the first video of this year, and so I thought that this might make for a great opportunity to talk about my big camera purchase of last year, which was the Leica M11-P. I bought the M11-P about 10 months ago or so, and I did so mostly because I had been using a Leica Q2 previously for about 4 years, and that was my favorite camera of all times, and I just loved everything about it. From the form factor to the images, the colors, the button layout, the build quality, how compact it was for such a capable full-frame camera, the reliability, and so on. At the time of buying the M11-P, I had however grown somewhat tired of shooting just at 20mm all the time, and so I wanted a camera that was essentially the same, so compact, beautiful, well built, and so on and so forth, with great image quality, but with an interchangeable lens setup. And the Leica M11-P looked very promising in that regard, even though obviously it came with a couple of caveats. With that said, the first point worth mentioning here is that I did not get into the Leica M system specifically because I wanted to shoot manual focusing lenses all of the time. That was more sort of just a thing that at best I sort of accepted at that's just how it's going to be, and I was willing to, let's say, give it a chance, but I wasn't exactly super looking forward to it. To put it more bluntly, not having autofocus was actually one of the 3 things that I thought might eventually lead to me selling the M11-P again, and the other 2 were not having any water resistance and also not having IBIS. So with all that said, let's talk about what my experience of shooting with this M11-P has been like for the past 10 months or so, the good, the bad, and everything in between. Now, I bought this camera a few months after my son was born, and so I didn't do any traveling outside of Europe. But still, I have taken this camera with me on an almost daily basis, taken it to Italy twice, as well as a couple of times to France and Switzerland and Belgium and the Netherlands, and on many hikes and city trips here in Germany where I live. Aside from using it as a travel companion, I've also carried it as my EDC camera on most days since I bought it, and I have used it for pretty much everything ranging from documenting everyday life to landscape and street photography. In short, I have used this camera well. This camera is certainly not spending its life on a shelf or in a box, and so I think that gives me some credibility when I talk about what it's like owning and using this camera. I will try not to bore you with any sort of technical specs that you can get anywhere. This is also not a technical review. As I said, this is a user experience review, and so without any further ado, let's just get into it. And let's start off with what was the biggest surprise for me, and that was that using this camera is just good fun in the sense that it gives you a feeling of joy, puts a smile on your face, might even make you rock hard, I don't know. It's a pleasure to use is what I'm saying. And much to my surprise, that was not despite it being a manual focus only camera, but in large parts because of it. It's hard to explain and equally hard to convey in camera, but using this rangefinder combined with the mechanical and tactile feeling of those lenses, it's just nice, you know? Now, do I occasionally miss a shot because I don't have autofocusing? Yes, of course, but I also do miss shots occasionally with my Sony a7 IV, and that has great autofocusing. It's just how it is. And considering that I have to manually focus every single shot, my hit rate was actually really good. And I wasn't expecting that, and I especially wasn't expecting to get decently good at manually focusing so quickly. I really thought that this would take me at least a couple of weeks, if not months, until I got the hang of it, but no, it was probably a day, maybe, if that. And from that point onwards, I pretty much nailed most of my shots, unless I was working in like a very badly lit environment or trying to focus on something that was moving really fast. But this is obviously not the right camera if you want to do any kind of action shooting. And if I ever have to do something like that, I will just use my Sony a7 IV instead. I do, however, like to shoot wide open a lot for various different reasons, and so it was a huge relief to me that manually focusing even wide open at f1.4 in this case is absolutely possible, and you can get pinpoint sharp images and focus spot on with the rangefinder focusing system. So just in case you've never used a rangefinder or a Leica rangefinder camera, let me just quickly explain to you how it actually works. You see, you have this little optical rangefinder where you can see straight through the camera, meaning that unlike with an old school SLR, you're not looking through the lens, but you can actually often even see the lens. And so in order to get your shots in focus, you have this little patch in the middle of the rangefinder with two images, and the goal here is to align those two ghost images to the point where there's only one sharp image. You can recompose and use those frame lines to frame your shot however you desire. The rangefinder has a couple of frame lines for various different standard focal lengths, and I would say that framing is fairly accurate, at least once you're a few meters away from your subject. At closer distances, it's a bit less reliable, depending on your focal length of course. That said though, you can always opt to use live view, where you get focus peaking to focus and compose your shots just as you would with any other camera. In my experience though, for whatever reason, I just wasn't really able to get my shots in focus using focus peaking in live view. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong. Honestly, truth be told, I haven't used it a lot. I'm using the rangefinder for probably at least 98% of my photos, but whenever I tried to get critical focus right using focus peaking, for whatever reason, the images came out slightly out of focus. And so in reality, I really only use the screen to review the photos that I've taken and to check the exposure. Which brings us to a slight negative point, which is the metering and the auto exposure system. Now it does work just as it should in daylight, but it can get a little confused in low light situations, especially if there are also some bright-ish lights around. On most cameras for stuff like night street photography, I would just set my aperture and shutter speed manually, tell the camera to underexpose by one stop or so, and let the auto ISO figure out the rest by itself. If I do the same with this M11-P here, however, I will only get the result that I want for an estimated 80% of the time, but I will also get the occasional shot where the exposure is just completely off for no apparent reason. And so in order to avoid that, especially because I wouldn't even notice it while shooting since I'm using the rangefinder, I now usually just set the ISO manually as well and check it every now and again with live view. Not the end of the world, but just something to be aware of. On the bright side, however, despite the lack of IBIS, low light performance has not been an issue so far. You can't do any handheld long exposure shots of course, but that's about it in terms of downsides. The images are very usable even at ISO 6400 in my opinion. Let's not fight about that though, because ISO noise performance can be a bit of a touchy subject for some. Also, luckily it is of course very helpful if you can just use very fast lenses in low light situations, and so it's just a great thing that with the Leica M system and those lenses being manually focusing only, they can be extremely compact because there's no room needed for any kind of focusing motor. And so that just means that you can bring fast primes of all of your favorite focal lengths out and about without having to schlep around a gigantic camera backpack. And I just love that. So that's one of the key reasons why I love using the M system. Overall, I will say that the image quality is right up there and on par with the best of the best, as you would expect from a camera with a modern 60 megapixel full frame sensor. And so especially with the gorgeous and in my opinion timeless design of this camera, it might very well be a forever camera, which cannot be said about many digital cameras. It is hard for me to imagine that even 10 years or more down the road, these 60 megapixel images will not look good anymore, or that this camera body will not be aesthetically appealing anymore. And so that might be an argument to justify paying the insane asking price for one of these, but more on that in a minute. One area that I was honestly not expecting to be an issue were the ergonomics. And I mean, if you look at this camera, you know that it wasn't exactly designed with ergonomics in mind, but neither was the Leica Q2. And I've never had any issues with the Leica Q2. And so I thought it's probably just going to be the exact same thing with the Leica M11-P. And everyone who says otherwise, I don't know, just has issues with their grip strength. But I was wrong, because apparently I'm not able to hold the camera upright without a grip. And so I ended up for the first few months getting a lot of shots that were slightly off and slightly wonky. And so eventually I decided to swallow my pride and buy myself one of these thumb grips. for the low asking price of 280 euros. And hey, it actually works. That has kind of fixed the issue for me at the cost of, well, slightly ruining the aesthetics. It's not too bad really, but also at the cost of, again, 280 euros. And so I guess while we're at it, why not just talk about the big elephant in the room here, which is how insanely expensive everything related to Leica cameras is nowadays. I mean, let's start with the camera itself. If you want to buy a Leica M11-P, a silver one like I got right here, brand new, that will set you back almost 9,000 euros here where I live. And that's only getting started. If you want another spare battery, which you absolutely will, more on that in a minute, that's another 175 euros. Want a thumb grip so that you have decent ergonomics, so that you can actually use the camera? Well, that's another 280 euros or so. And on it goes. And you're just getting started. Now, if you want to get some proper Summilux lenses, you are in to pay anywhere from, I don't know, 4,500 to 8,000 euros per lens, mind you. And so if you want to get just your standard focal lengths like an 28, 35 and a 50mm Summilux lens, brand new, that would set you back 18 grand or so, and that's just kind of ridiculous. Mind you, just those three lenses. And yeah, so honestly, I don't know. I obviously have no idea how much it costs to develop, manufacture cameras of this sort, especially here in Germany. I imagine it's not a cheap process. Labor is not cheap here. These cameras are made from very fine materials and to a high standard, obviously. And also I know that Leica is a bit of a luxury brand and that they are producing a niche product, which just means that, of course, they will be expensive. And just generally speaking, I don't mind paying more for certain products if there's a value proposition. And the value proposition can be better image quality, better ergonomics, better made, even soft factors like more character, heritage, if you like, social aspects like the workers who made this are treated and paid fairly. And yeah, I hope that all of that is the case, and I can certainly see that this is a very well-made camera and so on and so far. But seeing how Leica prices have gone up, especially over the past few years, I'm kind of terrified that they will continue to rise in that fashion. And if they will do, I fear that that will price out a lot of the existing customer base. And so I hope that Leica will not do that needlessly. But anyway, I will just leave it at that for now. My point was just to say that these cameras are very expensive, but luckily there are ways to sort of soften the blow of getting into a Leica M system at least a bit. And that's what I did, because when I first got this M11-P, I just bought a full lineup of Voigtlander lenses and I didn't have a single Leica M lens to start with. I started out with the 28mm Nocton f1.5, the 35mm f1.4 MC, the 50mm f1.2 and the new-ish 90mm f2. And they are all fantastic lenses. I have since bought a 50mm Summilux lens and sold the 50mm f1.2 Voigtlander. And yes, the Summilux lens is better than the Voigtlander, but that does not mean that the Voigtlander wasn't a great lens, because it absolutely was, and I have zero regrets starting with Voigtlander lenses. In fact, I'm planning to buy more. Now, do I want to get more Leica M glass and more Summilux lenses down the road? Yeah, absolutely. But again, that does not mean that those Voigtlander lenses aren't great lenses in their own right. They're very well made, they look great, they look very appropriate in cameras like the M11-P here, and they offer a ton of character if you shoot them wide open, and they are fantastically sharp and modern in the overall image quality if you stop them down a bit. And so again, I think they are a great way to get a foot into the door and really try out if the Leica M system is something for you. And if you don't want to spend the huge amount of money that is needed to get an M11P, you can always opt to buy an M11, maybe get a used one, maybe even get like an M10 or even an M240. Honestly, probably won't make much of a difference in just the real world. Okay, so overall, up until this point, I have said that the M11P is heaps of fun. It can take a great image in terms of quality and so on. It has a few flaws, and yes, it is expensive, but especially if you start out with Voigtlander lenses, it's not that bad. But to give you the full picture, I also have to mention a few negative points before we get to the conclusion. So first, let's talk about reliability. Well, I haven't had any huge issues, but that does not mean that I haven't had any issues, because on one day, for no apparent reason, the ring, the eye cup around the rangefinder just fell off and I lost it. Now, luckily, I was able to search the entire way that I walked that day, and somewhere along that way, I actually found it, and then I just glued it back on. And so no big deal. And even if I didn't, could have probably just gotten a replacement part. Hopefully that wouldn't have been too expensive, but who knows? It's Leica still. And yeah, either way, the camera was obviously still operational. So no big deal, I guess. But still, with the camera at that price point, I sort of would have preferred it if that wouldn't have happened. Now, truth be told, I have had quality issues with many, dare I say, most of the cameras that I have used over the years. My Sony a7 IV keeps freezing on me all of the time, especially if I switch between photography mode and video mode a lot. The Fuji X100VI that I had a slightly wobbly screen, and yeah, the list goes on. And that's not making any excuses for Leica. Again, as I said earlier, at this price point, this really shouldn't have happened, but I'm just saying that I'm not too fussed about it, for better or for worse. I guess that's just what it is, and it wasn't like a critical failure. It was just a minor inconvenience. Another issues that I get asked about a lot, especially in the comments, is the issue of overheating, or at least excessive heat in the camera. And so far I haven't actually had any problems with that myself, at least not while shooting. I always, or most of the time, do not use the live view when I'm shooting, so the display is off most of the time. And overall, I would say that battery life is really good. However, I've had it happen to me on many occasions by now that the camera turned on in my camera bag or in my camera backpack and drained the entire battery before I even took a single photo. And I only just noticed that the moment that I eventually took it out of my backpack, tried flicking it on, and then the camera was super hot and it wouldn't turn on, just said battery is empty, and then it was gone. And so that's one of the main reasons why I always bring a spare battery, because you never know when that might happen. And maybe that's also the reason why they switched to the on-off button with the SL3, but who knows, might be for a completely different reason. But that's an issue that I've experienced quite a lot, and not only with this camera, by the way, also with the Leica Q2, because yeah, apparently that switch is a bit too easy to accidentally turn on, probably just by some minor movements and rubbing with the walls of the camera backpack while I'm out and about. And so truthfully, the only real gripe that I have with this camera is the lack of weather resistance, because I do like going out and shooting in bad weather. And if I do that, I really do not want to be worried about my camera all of the time. Now, that's something that I really loved about the Leica Q2, which has an IP52 rating. I have taken that guy out in all kinds of conditions, and it has never missed a beat, and I never have to worry about it. And granted, I have taken the Leica M11P out in some pretty bad conditions as well, and so far it has survived, but I'm always worried about it. I mean, This has no weather resistance rating that I'm aware of, and certainly Leica M lenses, not to mention Voigtlander lenses, that's a completely different issue, but even Leica M lenses, even Summilux lenses, as far as I'm aware, don't have any kind of weather resistance rating. And so that's really a bit of an issue for me, because I mean, this is such an expensive camera, and as I mentioned earlier, those Summilux lenses aren't really cheap either. And so the last thing that I want to have happen is that this guy fries on me, or that I get some excessive moisture on the inside of the lens because I've taken it out in the rain. But at the same time, I want to be able to take my favorite camera out in those kinds of conditions and take photos, because that just makes for great photos. Now, I do assume that there will be some, I don't know, sealings and stuff inside of this camera, that it will be sealed off to some degree. But yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing a properly weather sealed Leica M12 at some point, preferably also along with a set of weather resistant or weather sealed Leica M lenses, Summilux lenses. I would probably not be able to afford those, but boy, would I want them. But again, that's really the only gripe that I have about this camera. But anyway, in conclusion, the Leica M11-P right now is certainly my most used camera, and probably also my favorite camera of all times. It's a bit neck and neck with the Leica Q2 and also with the Hasselblad 907X100C not far behind, but I think just by a bit, the M11-P just takes the cake. It's just heaps of fun to use. It feels insane. It looks timeless. It's really the only camera, the only digital camera that I ever thought of as a forever camera. And yeah, I just love it to bits. I don't need a silk screen, really. I can do without IBIS. As I found out, I don't need autofocusing, and no, I also don't want an electronic viewfinder. I mean, the MEV1 is an interesting concept in my opinion, and using an EVF is obviously technically superior to the rangefinder in many regards, even though the rangefinder has its distinctive advantages too. But I thought for a brief moment about selling the M11-P and getting myself one of those MEV1s. But then I thought about having both of them on the table at the same time and having to pick one to go out and shoot. And there's just no way ever that I would go with the MEV1 instead of the M11-P if they are sitting side by side. Yeah, that's just not going to happen. And so therefore, I'm just super happy with this camera. No regrets whatsoever about this purchase. The only thing, again, that I would like to see improved about this camera, and that would really get me to upgrade with the M12 whenever that will be released, or the M12P eventually. Yeah, that would be weather sealing. But we'd have to get weather sealing for both the body and the lenses, but fingers crossed that that might happen eventually. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. I hope this was somewhat interesting to you. If you'd like to check out some of my photography or follow along for the occasional live update, feel free to follow me on Instagram as well, and I will see you in another video next week. Until then, take care. Bye.